Okay, so in this video, I'm going to just introduce the code that we already have on the page that we're working with, and then introduce basic functions in JavaScript. So hopefully you're familiar with the syntax of HTML. We have this element structure of opening tag, closing tag, content in between. I think the only thing of note to talk about that you may not have seen before is some of these attributes on our HTML elements. So firstly, IDs. So we have our input fields, and they both have unique IDs. So an ID is a way of differentiating between HTML elements that have the same tag. For example, I have an input tag here, and I also have an input tag here. So this ID allows me to differentiate between them and gives me something to target either in my CSS or in my JavaScript. They should be unique throughout the whole document. So there should only be one element in my document with an ID of first number. Our input fields also have a type equals text. That tells the browser what type of input field this is, whether it's a number, a text, or a range, or there's lots of other ones. And we have a value attribute, which we can change to set the initial value when the user lands on the page. So if I run my code, you see we've landed on the page and there is 0 in there. And that's the user experience I want. I want the user to land on the page and they are greeted with 0, just like a normal calculator. The last attribute I want to introduce is this label attribute. So for every label, which we're looking at here, there is a for attribute that should tell the browser this label is attached to the thing with ID first number, the input field with ID first number. So that's what this for attribute here is specifying. Okay, and as well as that, we have a paragraph at the bottom where we want our output to go at the end of this video, and a calculate button. Now, by the end of the code long, I want the user to be able to input 2 numbers, and when we click calculate, it's just going to add them together. So we're not going to be worried about other operations, we're just going to add those 2 numbers together by the end of the code long. Next thing, in the CSS, hopefully you're used to the syntax of CSS as well, where we have a selector, the thing we're targeting in our HTML, and this syntax of key value pairs for the thing I want to change, the property I want to change, and the value I want to change it to. The only things you may not have seen before, this bit at the top, this asterisk, is a universal selector that says get me everything in my HTML and apply these styles to it. So I want all of my font to be the same. And you may also not have seen what is called a pseudo class. This idea of button : hover, this is the hover pseudo class. This says anytime you hover over a button, or anytime you find a button that is hovered over in my HTML, change the cursor to a pointer. So what does that actually look like for the user? Well, if I hover over my calculate, my cursor changes to a pointer. So that's our HTML and CSS. What about some JavaScript? So functions in JavaScript and functions in all programming languages are essentially lists of instructions to be triggered or to be executed at a later date. So what exactly do I mean by that? Well, some functions in JavaScript are ready-made and there for us to use, and we can also write our own custom functions. So right now we're going to use a ready-made function in JavaScript which is called alert. So alert is the name of a function I know is ready for me to use in JavaScript, and it's a list of instructions that essentially creates a pop-up in the browser. Now, whenever we call a function, whenever we trigger a function, we want to execute those instructions, we say the name of the function, and then we open and close some brackets. And with every line of JavaScript that is an executable, any line of JavaScript that we want to finish with, we put a semicolon at the end to say it's the equivalent of a full stop at the end of a sentence. So this alert will create a pop-up. If I run my code, we'll create a pop-up in the browser. And there we go. That pop-up doesn't say anything because this function of alert needs some additional information. So where I have my open and close brackets to call that function, I can add in quotes, in what's called a string, I can add in the information I want to be displayed on the page. So if I run my code now, I get hello world. So that is a pre-made